we highly recommend checking out Mindful Moments.
Absolutely.
It's like a personal pocket philosopher, offering bite-sized insights from great thinkers delivered through the magic of AI narration.
It's a great resource.
It's perfect for those moments when you need a little mental nourishment on the go. What if, to really get the Christian cross, you need to get the horrifying reality of lynching in America?
Whoa.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It's intense, but that's our deep dive today.
A bold statement for sure.
Yeah.
And that's really the core of what theologian James Cone argues in his book, The Cross and the Lynching Tree.
Okay.
He says these two symbols, the cross and the lynching tree, they're tragically intertwined. And to understand one, you got to understand the other.
Okay, so we're dealing with some really heavy, complex stuff here.
Yeah.
A brutal chapter in American history, but this is going to be a real eye-opener.
I think so.
Where do we even begin unpacking all of this?
Well, I think the first thing is to understand the sheer terror of lynching.
Right.
This wasn't just random mob violence.
Yeah.
This was a carefully orchestrated display of white supremacy.
Wow.
Imagine newspapers announcing lynchings in advance.
Oh my gosh.
Almost like event listings.
It's chilling.
Yeah.
Like some sort of horrific public spectacle.
Exactly. And crowds, sometimes numbering in the thousands, would gather to witness the torture and the murder of Black victims.
Really?
Thousands.
Thousands sometimes. Yeah, it was a communal act of terror.
Wow. And to make it even more grotesque, they would sell postcards with photos of the lynchings.
I know.
Like souvenirs.
Yeah.
It's hard to grasp the level of dehumanization that allowed for something like that.
It's truly horrifying. And it raises the question, how did Black communities respond to this constant threat?
Yeah.
This absolute disregard for their lives?
Right. Well, in the face of such unspeakable terror, they found solace and strength in the blues and the church.
Yeah.
Which speaks volumes about their resilience and their unwavering spirit.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The blues became a way to express the pain, the anger, and the defiance they felt. It was a way of reclaiming their humanity in the face of those who tried to strip it away.
And the Black church?
The church provided spiritual refuge,
Yeah.
a place of hope in a world that seemed determined to crush it.
The cross in this context takes on a whole new meaning.
Yeah.
It's not just a symbol of suffering.
Right.
It's a symbol of God's presence amidst that suffering.
That's where Cone's argument about the connection between the cross and the lynching tree really starts to hit home.
Yeah.
Doesn't it?
Absolutely. Think about it. Both represent terror, torture, and execution.
Yeah.
Both were reserved for the most marginalized and despised members of society.
Both Jesus and the victims of lynching were publicly humiliated.
Yes.
Stripped of their dignity.
Yes.
Subjected to unimaginable cruelty.
Yeah.
It's a parallel that's hard to ignore.
It is, and yet so often overlooked, particularly by white Christian theologians. Cone uses the example of Reinhold Niebuhr,
Okay.
a prominent theologian who wrote extensively about the cross, but never connected it to the lynchings happening in his own country.
So he was suffering from what Cone calls theological blindness.
Right.
So even though he understood the cross as a symbol of suffering,
Yeah.
he couldn't see its connection to the suffering of Black Americans.
Exactly. And this blindness goes beyond just one theologian.
Right.
It reflects a broader tendency in white Christianity to ignore or downplay the horrors of racial violence.
So how do we begin to bridge this gap? To see the cross and the lynching tree as connected?
One way is through the concept of the Black Christ and the re-crucified Christ.
Okay.
Ideas explored by writers like W.E.B. Du Bois and Langston Hughes.
Okay.
They argue that Jesus, as a marginalized and executed Jew, is fundamentally connected to the suffering of Black people in America.
It's a powerful reinterpretation of traditional Christian theology.
It is.
One that forces us to confront the ongoing struggle for liberation.
Yeah, and it's a reminder that we can't talk about suffering in the abstract.
Right.
We have to look at the specific ways that suffering manifests in the lives of real people.
Yeah.
And for Black Americans, that suffering is inextricably linked to the legacy of lynching.
But it wasn't just Black men who suffered. We need to talk about the experiences of Black women as well.
Absolutely. While they made up a smaller percentage of lynching victims, Black women were often targeted with horrific violence and sexual assault.
Oh, wow.
Their stories are often overlooked,
Right.
but they're just as important to understanding the full scope of this terror.
And their role in fighting back against this injustice can't be overstated.
Yeah.
Figures like Ida B. Wells Barnett risked their lives to expose the truth about lynching and mobilize others to fight for change.
Absolutely.
Their courage and determination are truly inspiring.
Yeah.
And their work reminds us that even in the darkest of times, there are always those who stand up for justice.
Speaking of shining a light on difficult subjects,
Yeah.
there's this YouTube channel I recently came across called Mindful Moments.
Okay.
It uses AI to analyze audiobooks and offer some really insightful perspectives.
That sounds fascinating. We'll have to check it out.
Yeah.
But going back to the issue at hand,
Yeah.
how can we make sure that these stories, these voices, these experiences aren't forgotten?
Right.
How do we keep the memory of lynching alive?
Yeah.
Not to dwell on the past, but to learn from it and prevent it from happening again.
Yeah. Yeah, remembering is crucial. Cohn argues that forgetting the horrors of the lynching tree allows the hate and the systems that enabled this violence to persist.
Right.
It's like trying to build a house on a foundation riddled with cracks.
Yeah.
Eventually, the whole structure will crumble.
So it's not just about looking back and feeling bad about what happened.
Right.
It's about understanding how the past shapes the present
Yeah.
and how we can use that knowledge to build a better future.
Exactly. Remembering isn't about dwelling in the past. It's about using the past to illuminate the present and guide our actions in the future. It's about honoring the victims and challenging contemporary forms of racial injustice.
Which leads to the question, where do we see these echoes of the lynching tree today? Or the strange fruit of our time, so to speak?
Well, it's certainly visible in the mass incarceration of Black and brown people. The systemic racism that permeates our criminal justice system is undeniable.
And the ongoing police brutality against people of color
Yes.
is a stark reminder that we haven't come as far as we like to think we have.
Right.
Countless lives have been lost to a system that seems to value some lives more than others.
And it's also in the economic disparities that continue to plague communities of color,
Right.
the lack of opportunity, the cycle of poverty.
Yeah.
These are all modern-day manifestations of the same systems that allowed lynching to flourish.
And let's not forget the rhetoric of hate and division that's become so prevalent in our political discourse.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that the seeds of prejudice and intolerance are still being sown.
All of these examples point to the fact that the work of racial justice is far from finished.
Right.
We can't afford to be complacent.
So what can we do? How do we move forward from this dark history, this legacy of violence and oppression?
We can start by acknowledging the truth about our past. We can't simply erase it or pretend it didn't happen. But acknowledging the past doesn't mean getting stuck in it. It's about using that knowledge to inform our present actions and work towards a future where such horrors are never repeated.
It's about recognizing that the cross for Christians isn't just some abstract theological concept.
Right.
It's a symbol of radical solidarity with the suffering,
Yes.
the marginalized, the victims of injustice.
Precisely.
Okay.
And that means confronting the ways in which we might be complicit in systems that perpetuate suffering, even if it's unintentional or unconscious.
So it's about personal reflection as much as it is about systemic change.
It is.
We have to look inward and examine our own beliefs and actions.
It's about having uncomfortable conversations, challenging our own biases, and calling out racism and discrimination whenever we see it. We can't be silent in the face of injustice.
This deep dive has been incredibly challenging, but also incredibly illuminating.
Yeah.
It's forced me to confront some hard truths, and it's left me feeling both heartbroken and hopeful.
I understand it's a lot to process, but that's the nature of confronting difficult history. It can be painful, but it's also necessary for growth and healing.
So where do we go from here? What are some concrete steps we can take to dismantle the systems that perpetuate injustice and create a world where everyone can flourish?
Well, for starters, we can support organizations that are actively working to dismantle systemic racism. There are countless groups doing incredible work in areas like criminal justice reform, education, equity, and economic empowerment.
And we can use our voices to speak out against injustice whenever we see it.
Yes.
We can engage in conversations with our family, friends, and community about these issues.
Education is key. Read books, watch documentaries, listen to podcasts. There are so many resources available to help us better understand the complexities of race and racism in America.
And let's not underestimate the power of art.
Right.
Art has a unique ability to move us.
It does.
To challenge our perspectives and to inspire action. We can support artists and creators whose work sheds light on these issues.
It's also important to remember that racial justice isn't just about big, sweeping changes.
Right.
It's also about the everyday choices we make, the ways in which we interact with others, and the assumptions we challenge.
It's about being mindful of our own biases
Yeah.
and actively working to dismantle them.
Yeah.
It's about creating spaces where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued.
It's about remembering that the fight for racial justice is a marathon, not a sprint. There will be setbacks and challenges along the way, but we can't afford to give up hope.
The stakes are just too high. The dream of a just and equitable society is something worth fighting for, and each of us has a role to play in making that dream a reality. It's both daunting and inspiring at the same time.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that even small acts of resistance can make a difference. The civil rights movement was built on the courage and determination of everyday people who refused to accept the status quo. Their legacy should inspire us to keep pushing forward.
So much of this comes down to remembering, doesn't it? Remembering the horrors of the past, so we don't repeat them, remembering the victims so their stories aren't forgotten, remembering the resilience and the fight for justice that continues to this day.
It's about carrying the torch of justice forward, and carrying that torch means not only remembering the past, but also acting in the present to create a future where everyone can truly experience the liberating power of the cross, where it's a symbol of hope and healing for all, not just a select few.
That's a powerful image. A world where the cross and the lynching tree are no longer intertwined, but where the cross stands as a symbol of true liberation for everyone. It's a world worth striving for.
It certainly is, and it all starts with each of us taking a hard look at ourselves, our beliefs, and our actions. What can we do individually and collectively to dismantle the systems that perpetuate injustice and create a more equitable world?
That's the question we all need to be asking ourselves. This deep dive has given us a lot to think about, a lot to grapple with, but it's also given us a roadmap for how to move forward, how to be agents of change in our own lives and communities.
So if you're feeling inspired to delve deeper into this subject, I highly recommend checking out James Cone's The Cross and the Lynching Tree. It's a challenging but essential read. You can find a link to purchase the book in the show notes.
And if this deep dive resonated with you, please share this episode with your friends and family. Let's keep this conversation going and continue to learn and grow together.
Remember, true change starts with each of us. So what will you do today to make a difference?
That's a powerful question to leave us with. Until next time, keep diving deep and keep striving for a more just and compassionate world.